Okay, so I want to talk again a bit more about how Justin King uses specific words and doesn't use them, because I do think it's very important to really look at what he's saying and what he's wanting you to think, what he wants you to think that he believes, but without actually telling you what he really believes. Sort of messes around with it a lot. I don't think people look critically enough at what he says at all. I'm going to say again, he's very conscious of the words that he uses. He said this a couple of times in videos previously, that he's sort of stopped using particular words because he noticed that people are most likely to switch off with them. But I think another consideration is what YouTube might censor, So often you'll find YouTubers will avoid using certain words because they're worried that it's going to mean that their video gets censored or shadow banned or something. So we'll discuss about whether or not that's always a consideration with him.
Conversations. As far as the conversation with the Palestinian Authority, it's either going to be immediately after Israel or it's going to be absolutely last.
Okay, so this is about the. This is a video that he made just before Biden was supposed to be doing this trip to Israel and so on, because he was going to sort it out and stop the Gaza bombings or whatever, and then the hospital bombing completely messed that up. But this is before it, so he's sort of telling you about how it's going to work, which I just find quite intriguing. Not sure. I just find it quite intriguing that he knows all this.
I know foreign policy people right now, you're like, why are they talking to them?
Okay, so he often talks about foreign policy people. Now, a lot of that is he's talking about people who look at what's going on abroad and think carefully about it, but he sort of frames it as, I don't think of myself as a foreign policy person. I think of myself as someone who's interested in what happens abroad, but I'm not a state actor. Okay, state actors are foreign policy people. I mean, not all of them, but you kind of need to be a state actor to really be a foreign policy person. But he's saying it like that because that's his framing of how he wants you to think you are. He wants you to think that you are in the position of a state actor, essentially, or that you're getting into the mind of a state actor. And this is your perspective on things, right? Because I've mentioned before that he has a tendency to talk about poker games, and it'll come up here at some point. And he likes to make you feel like you're detached from all of this. Like, this isn't really about you. This isn't really anything to do with you. You're just taking an interest. It's kind of how he likes you to think of it.
Foreign policy is about power, right? So foreign policy people are kind of like, what is this? To have a series of meetings about the fate of the Palestinian people and not meet the Palestinian Authority president, that is not a good look. That's why.
So I kind of find it quite interesting that he's sort of basically suggesting that the Palestinian Authority are kind of the bad guys, which is interesting because it's Hamas who run the Gaza Strip, who did the invasion of October 7th that started all of this off. So why would Biden be talking to Palestinian Authority and not Hamas? Is he not talking to Hamas? Except that he kind of wants you to conflate them. Justin and everyone else, they want to, people like Biden, they want you to kind of conflate both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and all of the Palestinian people. And that's kind of the way that he uses these words to try and frame it all that way. Now, and it's quite bad. It's really bad because, obviously there are many innocent civilians thousands, well over 10,000 by this time, being killed in Gaza Strip. There's also many people being killed in the West Bank and evicted in the West Bank because the aggression has gone up there too. And it is sort of funny that you would think that the Palestinian Authority would be the people to talk to. Now, to be honest, there are a lot of people in the West Bank and probably in Gaza too don't actually think of the Palestinian Authority as speaking for them. They see the Palestinian Authority as puppets of the Israeli government. But he's not really acknowledging that, so it's like they're pretending to be the bad guys on behalf of people who actually have no voice and aren't the bad guys. It's pretty despicable.
It's the Palestinian Authority president has a whole lot of limitations on what they can actually do diplomatically here, unless there is some kind of major breakthrough with Israel. So, but that's the trip.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about the update on Biden's trip, which was kind of interesting, because obviously things went a bit wrong, you could say. So,
before I was going to say anything. Okay, so starting with the trip. By the reporting, Biden went over there and he made the push. He pushed for a limited ground offensive. Some of this was done in public. The assumption is that a whole lot was done in private. The short version was that he used U.S. experiences post-2001 to try to explain that a full-on ground offensive is not the answer and just creates more.
So this is the pro-Biden propaganda. He's like, oh, Biden's trying really hard. Yeah, he really is. I love the kind of limited ground offensive, because all Justin really talks about is limiting the ground offence. He doesn't really talk about the bombings, and he doesn't really talk about the people being killed, and we'll get to that in a bit. But, oh God, it's just really... Anyway, so this is sort of an interesting bit. God, I hate when they... Here we go.
Solid. So we don't use those. But we don't need them. Something that was confirmed. Israel showed some drone footage, or some aerial surveillance footage. Let's just leave it at that. And later, a Palestinian posted photos of the parking lot. The dispersal of the cars lines up. So,
things to note here. He's saying a Palestinian posted the footage, okay? So he's kind of, again, it's quite often a thing where he wants you to think of all Palestinians as the same. And I think it's worth noting here, he doesn't mention, the words that he doesn't mention, right? He doesn't mention hospital, because it was a hospital, a car park of a hospital that was hit. He doesn't mention bombing. He doesn't mention that there are injuries or that there were deaths. He doesn't, he talks about flattened and level. These are words that he uses. And here we go. Okay, a bit
now
more.
you have information coming from both sides that confirms each other. Okay, so that you can trust. Okay, so based on that, the idea that it was a joint direct attack munition, no.
So it's really funny that when I watched this video, I'd always seen it written as JDAM, capital letters JDAM. This is the first time I've heard, when I watched this video, it's the first time I'd heard, or really knew what it was actually short for. I mean, I think I'd seen it once in a long form article or something. But I find it quite interesting that he has named the missile. He's even used the word missile. Now, you would think that a missile would be a word that would be curtailed on YouTube, that he would be worried about saying it. You think he'd be worried about saying the name of a missile like that, but he's apparently not.
Not based on those images. That would be what Israel would have used. The dispersal of the cars is a pretty clear indication. Another one being the clay tiles that are still on the roof of the hospital. Those, it is unlikely that those would be undisturbed. All evidence suggests that it was not what Israel was using.
So he uses the word Israel, okay? That's a word that he uses. He uses the words Palestinian. He uses the word Biden.
So, you have that. The flip side to it. The patterns of the burns, I don't know much about that, but I sent it to somebody who does. And they said that it is consistent with the propellant burning off of an errant rocket. So, and I asked him to put a percentage on that. He says 80% that it was an R-160.
So now he's named the other kind of missile, the missile that would be used by Hamas. And I just find it quite interesting that you would think in the context of YouTube he wouldn't want to be saying those out loud on YouTube, but he's apparently fine with that.
So you have 98% chance that it was not what Israel was using, and an 80% chance that it was what the Palestinian forces, or one aligned to it, because there's another option there, were using. That's what you have. You also have this. There's a lot of people using terms flattened and leveled. It hit the parking lot. It hit the parking lot. So, all of this sounds good after the fact, right?
So he's basically been explaining that it wasn't actually Israel that bombs that hospital that upset the trip. Now, it's worth noting, I've not seen any video where he raised back on that, but it's been pretty much debunked. All of that he said there has been pretty much debunked since then. But he's not raised back on that that I've seen in any of the videos since. So, you know, and I think there's, I feel like that's very telling, because if he's so well informed, if he's so understanding, if he's sort of seen everything, he should have corrected that, but he hasn't, as far as I can tell. And I think it's also worth noting that he did a video about how Seymour Hersh was wrong about the US blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. And, I mean, basically everyone except the US government, I mean, it's probably, anyone who doesn't side with the US government is basically prepared to say, yeah, it's probably true, actually, they probably did. Yeah, it's I think it's worth noting always who is favoured by what he's saying, what he's telling you, who is favoured. And a lot of the time, pretty much 100% of the time, who is really being favoured is the US government. That's who it is. This is quite interesting, quite amusing, this bit here.
Favorable to Israel are going to say, well, what would happen if an errant rocket just randomly hit dead center? The odds of that are super slim, but yeah, it's a possibility. I guess that's the cost of being the state in the situation. And then somebody said that there was another group at play other than the one that everybody's been talking about. And that actually makes a whole lot more sense. Do not have evidence to confirm this part. But there's another group that has the same type of stuff that is reportedly active. They are also less well trained, so they would be more likely to make a mistake. So that's based off of the evidence that we have. Now,
Okay, so he's been talking about other groups. He never actually mentions Hamas, the name of the group. He doesn't mention Gaza. He doesn't mention the name of the other group. And this is because, really, by naming them, he makes them distinct, a distinct part of the Palestinian people, okay? He doesn't want you to distinguish between the different parts of the different populations of the Palestinians, okay? He doesn't want you to distinguish between Hamas and the people of Gaza. He doesn't want you to distinguish between Hamas and any other groups that are working there. That's what he's doing. That's why he's saying all of this. I think it's really important you get that. Okay, let's... Okay, so there's this one.
the French have adopted a more hawkish position than the United States. I know people want to talk about the moral implications and all the horror, and I get it. But from a foreign policy standpoint, please remember Israel is an ally. The fact that the U.S. didn't go in guns blazing is amazing. The calls for restraint, they're showing up more and more frequently. And it's to stop the conflict from spreading. My guess is that very soon we will probably start hearing about countries that you might not expect, maybe China.
Okay, so he's explaining to you that the reason he doesn't talk to you about all the bombings, the families being wiped out, the hospitals being bombed, the fact that hospitals are basically collapsing, then he doesn't talk about all the videos that you can see of kids with limbs amputated. He's not talking about that because Israel is their ally. He's saying Israel is our ally, okay? He says it's our ally, not my ally. He's not the ally. Israel is not the ally of the citizens of the USA, all right? Israel is the ally of the US state. But he says it like that because he wants you to conflate yourself as a citizen of the USA and others, to be quite honest, all of his other fans. He wants us, me, other people watching, to conflate ourselves with the US state. And he mentioned foreign policy people again. He's doing that on purpose because that's a state position. Really have to get this, okay? This is why he's saying these things. Okay.
Unlikely. It wasn't necessarily just a couple of weeks ago. So starting off, an expansion of this conflict could include other non-state actors getting involved. And that's bad, but that's on the opposite end from the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario begins with Arab states, with other Middle Eastern countries, with other countries in the region getting directly involved with their actual military. That's your worst case scenario, because from there, it is very easy for dominoes to start falling.
So, I mean, this is quite, it's not unreasonable. You do have, now, but he's kind of trying to say that this is all that Biden is trying to stop. It's pick the...
If other...
Oh, for God's sake. Has this thing where it suddenly goes out for some reason. I have to correct it. Always seems to take a really long time to come up.
Front.
Right.
Countries in the region decided to intervene on the Palestinians' behalf, they would do so by going after Israel. There would be attacks on Israeli territory. If
I don't care.
If that coalition of countries or singular country started to make gains into Israeli territory, that's when it could go from something that is horrible to something that is unthinkable. In the West in general, constantly telling Ukraine, don't send troops into Russian territory. Why? Because they're a nuclear power, and it could be perceived as an existential threat, which could lead to the deployment of strategic arms, nuclear weapons.
So in this, so he was talking here about why he's been
To
intentionally
talk
vague.
about a what if, and I guess we'll talk about why I have been, quote, intentionally vague lately in some of the things that I have been talking about. Okay, so here's the message. I'm a professor and teach about foreign policy. I have a lot of respect for the way you present things and make them accessible without needing a PhD. I understand why you were intentionally vague about how it could, quote, get really bad. One of the reasons I like you is that you aren't alarmist and don't scare people for clicks. Now that that threat has subsided, I beg you to explain what the worst case scenario was. People should really know. Okay.
So what he was doing, so he did sort of spend some time talking about this expansion that could have happened, and he's saying that he wasn't really saying that, but that did come across to me in the other videos, and he kind of like drops suggestions, drops hints. So he's still being a little bit vague, to be honest with you. He's not exactly saying which countries and everything like that. So yeah, he might say that he's, and like, yeah, he's not outright said it, but he's still been saying it, and it's still been there, working away in people's minds. They've been kind of, and I think he kind of does it in a lot of ways because he wants you to think that you're kind of intelligent, that you're his audience and you understand these things. So he's talking code, but you can understand it, and you know that really this is something big that's really being headed off. Anyway. Oh yeah, I'm gonna do this one again just because it kind of amused, like I did this last time, but the thing is that I think it's a really good illustration.
It's not actually something that resonates with your local politician or your representative up in DC. We're going to do this because I got a message. And basically it was, hey, I called my representative and told them that if they didn't support a particular measure and call for a certain thing, that I wasn't going to vote for them. And I could tell in their voice they just did not care what I was saying. Give me a reason to...
So the word he's avoiding saying there is ceasefire. Very clearly that's the word that he's avoiding saying. I just find it so funny because there's no way that one, the YouTube algorithm would be like, oh no, we don't like the word ceasefire, let's shadow ban videos that use the word ceasefire. There's no way that's the case. And Who of his audience is going to switch off when they hear the word ceasefire? Who? I mean, do you really think that even people who are really rabidly pro-Israel are going to switch off when he uses the word ceasefire? Really? I'm not convinced they would. The reason he's not using the word ceasefire is because he's trying to avoid making it real in your head, okay? That's why. Okay, and we'll go to the last one. And we're seeing it again in this.
Repeatedly from different people. So, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, last night some news broke, and it said that a deal had been reached. And the deal was basically there was going to be a 5-day a pause. There would be a 5-day pause in the fighting, and there would be 50-something captives returned during that period. That was the reporting. Shortly after that, both the Israeli and U.S. governments were like, no, that's not real. So people are asking what it means. Well, you have 3 options. 1, it's bad reporting. It happened.
Okay, so we're seeing again that he's avoiding using the word ceasefire. Now, okay, so in this context, it's correct that this is not going to be a ceasefire, okay? But at the same time, he still doesn't want to get there. He does not want you to get to thinking ceasefire. And yeah, and it is a pause. It's not an actual ceasefire. But I just find it really interesting how he's sort of pretending that he's about to say it. And then he doesn't.
That's said that it was symbolic. Yeah, I mean, there's some truth to that. You know, it shows that the U.S. is with Israel and Israel is with the U.S. and all of that stuff, and that's important in that geopolitical card game that's going on over there.
Okay, so that geopolitical card game, and he's also making it very clear again, U.S. and Israel, like that, that's the U.S. and Israel. The state, that is. But he kind of wants you to think that you are part of the US state and therefore you also are like that with Israel. Okay? That's how he's trying to make it. Which is why he doesn't want you to think about Palestinians as like all different people. He doesn't want you to separate Hamas from people of the civilians of Gaza. He doesn't want you to separate people in the West Bank from people in Gaza. He wants you to think of them all as a kind of amorphous blob, because that's how Israel wants you to think of it. Okay? And that international poker game, that international card game, I've mentioned this before, he said this before, and then someone said in the comments that it also kind of means that you're thinking of the people of Gaza as chips in a poker game, which is also pretty nasty. And this is how he wants you to think. He wants you to think of yourself as an outside observer. He wants you to think of this all as a game. He doesn't want you to think of the people of Gaza as human beings. But at the same time, he's trying to avoid... He won't use the kind of words that the likes of Netanyahu uses, like Amalek and animals. But at the same time, he will not humanise the Palestinians. He will not humanise the people of Gaza who are being bombed. He's not doing it. He refuses to do it. And he's also just making it very clear that Israel and the USA, like that, and he makes sure to conflate us, the people who are watching, with the US government. That's what he's doing all the time. You really need to watch for it. And that'll do for today, I guess.